first panelist today is Francis Daly. Frank Daly was the corporate director of ethics and business conduct for Northrop Grumman Corporation, which is an aerospace and defense business based in Los Angeles that needs no introduction. He combines considerable practical experience in directing business ethics programs with an educational background in philosophy and theology. A Kallman Executive Fellow of the Center for Business Ethics at Bentley University, Mr. Daly was a member of the working group of the Defense Industry Initiative, an industry self-governance organization. He is also a past chairman of the board of the Ethics Officer Association and a founding member of the Southern California Business Ethics Roundtable. Mr. Daly served on the Business Advisory Council of the School of Business Administration and has also taught at the Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. So to begin where I left off, on the question of management, this question of meaning sounds awfully esoteric and abstract. And I'm curious, Mr. Daly, are trust and meaningful, are these terms that you would expect to be the subjects of a business-focused colloquium? Are they really relevant to the practice of actual business on the ground?
Well, that's a big question, but let me start by just saying that I'm the only non-academic on the panel, so I can ask all the questions and the rest of them have to deal with them.
We're not going to let you get away with that.
The issue, after I spent 20 years, I've actually been involved in business ethics for 30 years. 20 of those years I was involved in a very large corporation. At times we had 125,000 people working in the corporation. And because the defense industry was kind of motivated, if you can say, by the government, with whom it does 90% of its business, to put ethics programs into place in the 80s, actually. They responded quickly with a lot of resources and a lot of enthusiasm to get these kinds of programs up and running. The problem was that the basic and this was not only the defense industry, but a lot of companies have done that, spent a lot of money and a lot of resources to get these programs up and running. But today, unless it's changed dramatically in more recent years, most of the programs, the ethics programs in large companies are run by lawyers and by the law department, which is not to diss lawyers. It's just that the role of the law department in a corporation is basically to maximize the benefit that the law affords you and to protect you if you run afoul of it. It's not to create a culture or an ethic in the larger organization. But business has a particular difficulty in getting beyond the fact that that's the appropriate place to put it, rather than, for example, as Bill will talk about, in the organization that's responsible for the development of the organization. We got too many organizations here, but in the grouping in the company that's responsible for the development of the organization, and not so much as ethics programs have been. Now they've developed beyond this, but initially they were police operations. If you think about that, the number of people who actually commit some kind of an infraction that's very serious in terms of the future of the corporation is very small. E.O. Wilson, who was, not E.O., it's the other Wilson, who taught at UCLA for years, James Q. Wilson, was a criminologist. And he said, interesting fact that he said after 31 years as a criminologist, what most impressed him was not the small number of people who committed serious crimes, but the huge number of people who didn't. So if you run an ethics program that's focused on the small number of people and you neglect the good values, for example, that the rest of them bring to the corporation and encourage them to put those into place, then you've got a real dysfunction going on. And we have some of that, I think, in business. The irony of the whole thing is, in a way, the question that was raised about the importance of culture in the business, which And when you're talking about culture, now you're talking about issues like trust and meaning and that kind of thing. It was raised by the regulators. Now, some people started talking about this years ago, people like Mike Hoffman. But for most of the industry, this came when the United States Sentencing Commission said, if we're going to make a judgment about you, we're not going to make a judgment simply with how many people you trained, et cetera, but we want to know what's your culture like. Is it something that encourages people, for example, to act ethically in the workplace, not simply to know the particulars of every law and regulation that they have to avoid breaking. So I think it's a particularly difficult, in this colloquium, the first one I came to, we were talking about trust. And one of the ideas I came away with was that we had a very good discussion, and we had a huge number of good examples of things, good things that happen when there's trust in the workplace, but we didn't actually get to say, what is it? What is trust? What is it that identifies someone as being either trustworthy or able to inspire trust in other people? Is it a talent? A gift? Is it a learned? What is it? And I think we still haven't exactly, maybe today we'll get a little bit more on that. And now we've got another one of those words, meaning. What's the significance of meaning? For instance, in my business, an aerospace business, half of you in this room probably wouldn't want to work in it. You think it's unethical from the get-go to make weapons. Well, what makes it meaningful for the thousands and thousands of people who work there when we know that in the main people tell us what's important to them is not just the salary, but some of the other things about their job, and what are those other things? So it seems to me this is no easy task that we've set ourselves. And in the business world, I'm not entirely sure, well, I am. Let me knock out the entirely, and that I'm not sure. I think that a lot of people who are leaders in business are not equipped by their educational and organizational background to ask these questions and answer them. And so they have to be asked and answered from somewhere else. It's interesting because it seems to me that if in fact there is some work that I saw a lot of you smile when I said you wouldn't work in the aerospace industry, okay? Then it seems to me it's not work that makes the meaningfulness. It's the relationship of the worker to the work that makes the meaningfulness. And that's a really difficult thing to get your hand around. My second question is that we should focus on the fact that most jobs aren't like the ones we want to do. New York Times in February 28 did a whole series on work. It was about the office. How many people work in the office? Most people don't work in an office. Most people work driving trucks, sweeping streets, running farms, doing rice paddies, working in mines, etc. Are we talking about meaningful work for them? And how do we get a handle on that? So I think that, that's a second thing. We talk about what exactly do we intend, and is that applicable to the bus driver, the farmer, etc. We've all probably met people who are kind of a little bit out of place or off track in the business. You know, like Hector, the janitor, who goes and tells the CEO that he shouldn't be doing this. Almost shakes his finger at him. Or Eddie Wheeler, who was a machinist. And when I worked at Northrop, I used to go to the machine shop once a week to get my reality check with Eddie, who loved to talk to the guys who wore the ties. I was in the hospital recently visiting with a friend, and this lady came in, and she said to him, "Paul, are you okay? And do you need anything? Can I get the nurse for you? Are you comfortable?" Etc. When she left, I said, "Paul, is that a nurse's aide?" He said, "No, it's the cleaning lady." So where do we find meaningful work, it seems to me? So I think one of the things, Martin Luther King, for example, Jr. had something to say about that. It was in a sermon he gave in a Baptist church in Chicago in 1967. If it falls to your lot to be a street sweeper, go out and sweep streets like Michelangelo painted pictures. Sweep streets like Handel and Beethoven composed music. Sweep streets like Shakespeare wrote poetry. Sweep streets so well that all the hosts of heaven and earth will have to pause and say, here lived a great street sweeper who did his job well. Now, Martin was a little dramatic, but that's why he was so forceful. And so it seems to me there's a certain sense in which we've got to kind of get our arms around that particular point as well. The other thing that's happening that's really kind of troubling is Gallup did a poll, worldwide poll in 2013, that said that 13% of workers were fully engaged in their work. 13%. 75% of people in the United States were more or less engaged. That meant they had what big absenteeism, or what some people call presenteeism, that you're there, but that's all you are. Okay. So the question is, what is wrong with American business, for example? If you were looking at a data that says that only 26 of your people are anyway meaningfully engaged in their work, can you imagine what it would do to productivity if you increase that by 5%? What is going on? Why? So, these questions of meaning and of trust really have hard-nosed implications. The problem is we have trouble crossing the bridge because we think it's the soft stuff in business. When in fact, and because we think that profit is the motive rather than the result of doing it well. So it seems to me that these kinds of questions kind of are sitting out here for the panel to answer, for the rest of the panel to answer. And finally, I'd like to focus a little bit on, before I was in business, I was in ministry, and I'm on my way back there, actually. And I come from a tradition that didn't look at work as negative, like Marx and Keynes may have, in a sense, as Bill pointed out. Monastic tradition, for example, saw that there were three things to make your life really meaningful. You prayed, you read and studied, and you worked manually 5 hours a day. The Benedictines have been doing that since the year 547. And you've all enjoyed Benedictine after dinner or in a more relaxed meeting. It's a wonderful product. In fact, I'm told that the Trappist monks in Spencer, Massachusetts, have starting beer aficionados tell me they've just started making a superb beer. It's a little pricey, actually. So they got the whole economic story. So this tradition that goes down through history says that actually work is not alien. I mean, the major spokesman in the world, although it's somewhat neglected, against Marx was Leo XIII, who wrote an encyclical called Rerum Novarum, which was, in many ways, the start of the union movement in the world, because he saw that work was something that made you who you are. Work transforms nature, so that means it has an effect beyond you. It's not something just for you. But it helps you achieve fulfillment as a human being. And the question is, we need to find out how do we motivate people to basically get to that point. But it isn't exactly the work, because, especially in the Industrial Revolution, work was seen as merchandise. You bought it. And if the person who gave it to you wasn't any good at it, you get rid of it and got another one. So if work is seen just simply as a commodity that you buy, rather than something in which you engage the worker in something that's much larger, in which he transcends himself, not just a burden, even though work is hard at times, but not just a burden, but does it say something interiorly to the person about who they are and their place in the world? And it seems to me that that's what we're trying to get at in terms of meaningful. I mean, in our own experience, for instance, I know a guy, for instance, who hasn't worked for 20, people say he hasn't worked for 20 years. He's beautifully, nicely dressed in his leisure suit, as he, not his leisure, his exercise suit as he runs around town. He's just sued the federal government to pay off his kids' loans, student loans. Hasn't worked for 20 years. What people in town, what they say about him is, there's a certain sense in which people, the community aspect of it, that they're upset because they're carrying a burden. He's a burden to them. And they also think less of him as a human being because he doesn't work. What is the meaning of that? And it seems to me that that's what we need to grapple about.